The scanner's alert pierced through the quiet hum of the bridge at exactly 3:47 hours. Lieutenant Sarah Chen jolted upright from her station, her coffee forgotten as streams of data flooded her screens. She had been monitoring deep space frequencies for 3 years aboard the Persistence, and nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever looked like this. Captain Vasquez to the bridge, she called through the comm system, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Captain Elena Vasquez arrived within minutes, her dark hair still damp from the shower. She had learned long ago that urgent calls in deep space rarely brought good news, but the expression on Chen's face was different, not fear. Wonder. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" Elena asked, leaning over the sensor display. "A signal, Captain." "But not just any signal." Chen's fingers danced across the controls, isolating the frequency. "Listen to this." The bridge speakers crackled to life. What emerged was not the random static of cosmic background radiation or the predictable pulses of a neutron star. This was structured, mathematical, deliberate, a pattern that rose and fell like breathing, like a heartbeat that had been beating for longer than human civilization had existed. "How old?" Elena asked quietly. Chen swallowed hard. "Quant decay analysis puts it at approximately 80,000 years, Captain. Maybe older." The bridge fell silent. 80,000 years before the pyramids, before agriculture, before humans had even left the African continent. This signal had been traveling through the void, calling out to anyone who might listen. "There's more," Chen continued, her fingers trembling slightly as she brought up another display. "The mathematics. It's a universal language, Captain. Prime numbers, geometric constants, basic physical laws, and embedded within it." She paused, checking her translation. "Matrix again, to be certain. Coordinates. And what our AI translates as a distress call." Elena stared at the data, her mind racing. Someone had sent this message when Earth's last ice age still gripped the northern continents. Someone had called for help across an ocean of time so vast it made her head spin. "Plot a course to those coordinates," she ordered, "and send this data to Concord Council headquarters. They need to see this." 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the great circular chamber of the Concorded Council, humanity's delegation of 5, facing representatives from 46 other species. The chamber was a masterwork of alien architecture with gravity platforms allowing species of different physiologies to coexist in the same space. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and a dozen different chemical signatures. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the signal data rotating slowly as delegates examined it with instruments, sensors, and sensory organs. Humanity had never evolved. "Fascinating," clicked Ambassador Thex of the Kryn, their crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. "An archaeological treasure. We should dispatch a research vessel to study the origin point." "With respect, Ambassador," Elena interjected, "this isn't just archaeology. It's a distress call." Someone asked for help. Sound like grinding rocks emerged from the Threen delegation, their equivalent of laughter. Captain Vasquez rumbled. Elder Cormath, his boulder-like body shifting slightly. "That someone has been dead for 70 millennia, possibly 80. Their civilization rose and fell before most species in this chamber even evolved." "That doesn't change what they asked For Elena pressed forward, they called. For help, we heard them, we should respond. The Valoran representative, a floating, jellyfish-like being named Zapira, pulsed with bioluminescent curiosity. Forgive my confusion, Captain, but respond how? What aid can possibly be rendered to the extinct? Do you intend to resurrect the dead? I intend to answer their call, Elena said simply. To go to those coordinates and discover what happened, to bear witness to ensure they're not forgotten. The chamber erupted, delegates conferred with their aides, their translators, struggling to keep up with the cacophony of languages. The concept seemed to baffle them. Resources were precious. Space was dangerous. Why spend either on a call that was ancient beyond relevance? Ambassador Thex's voice cut through the noise like crystal chimes. Captain Vasquez, I mean no disrespect to your species, but this emotional response is illogical. The dead cannot be saved. Why do you mourn strangers who turned to dust before your ancestors discovered fire, before they painted on cave walls, before they even were? Elena took a deep breath. She thought of her sister Maria, trapped in that collapsed mining tunnel on Titan, calling for help that came 3 hours too late. She thought of all the voices throughout human history that had called out and received no answer because someone called for help, she said quietly, but her voice carried through the chamber. Because they reached out into the darkness, hoping someone would care. Because maybe, just maybe, there's something there worth finding, but mostly, Ambassador, because it's the right thing to do, because we would want someone to answer if it were us. Concorded Council debated for 6 hours. In the end, they voted 29 to 18 against mounting an official expedition. Resources were needed elsewhere. The signal was scientifically interesting, but practically meaningless. Humanity's proposal was denied. Elena stood before the council one final time. Then we'll go alone, she announced. Humanity did not ask for permission. We asked for partnership, but we will answer this call with or without concorded support. The chamber fell silent. In 300 years of concorded history, no species had ever volunteered for a mission that offered no strategic advantage, no resource gain, no territorial benefit. The very concept seemed to break something fundamental in their understanding of spacefaring civilization. As the human delegation left the chamber, Elena heard Ambassador Thex's voice behind her, translated through her earpiece. They are either the most noble species we have encountered or the most foolish. Perhaps both. Elena smiled grimly. Perhaps, she murmured to herself, but we're going anyway. Within 2 weeks, 12 human ships assembled at the rally point beyond Jupiter's orbit. Volunteers from across human space, scientists, engineers, medical personnel, even a poet who insisted that someone needed to document this for history. They were heading into the outer veil, a region of space where gravitational anomalies swallowed ships and spatial distortions made navigation nearly impossible. They were going to answer a call from the dead, and the galaxy watched in bewilderment, unable to understand why. The fleet moved through hyperspace like ghosts through dream. 12 human vessels, their hulls marked with the insignia of different colonies: Mars, Europa, New Shanghai, Kepler 442b. Inside the Persistence, Captain Elena Vasquez stood before the main viewport, watching the impossible colors of faster Then light travel paint streaks across. Her vision. 3 months, Chief Engineer Marcus Chen said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. 3 months of wondering if we're chasing something real or just following in. Echo, Elena accepted the coffee. Gratefully, you having doubts, Marcus? Always, he admitted, a slight smile crossing his weathered face, but doubt doesn't mean we shouldn't go. My grandfather used to say that every great human achievement started with someone doubting their sanity. Marcus had joined the expedition for reasons Elena understood without asking. He spent his off hours reading about ancient human civilizations, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, civilizations that rose and fell and were nearly forgotten until archaeologists dug them from the earth. He believed that memory was sacred, that forgetting the past was a kind of death. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Amara Akinquo reviewed xenobiology texts for the 100th time. She had volunteered within hours of hearing about the mission, abandoning a prestigious research position at the University of Mars. Her colleagues had called her crazy. She called it the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to study a species that had existed before humanity's ancestors could even conceive of the stars. Doctor, you should rest, her assistant suggested. Rest? Amara looked up, her eyes bright despite the late hour. We're about to meet a civilization that predates ours by incomprehensible ages. How can anyone rest? Throughout the fleet, similar stories played out. Every crew member carried their own reasons for this journey. Some sought adventure, others sought purpose. Many simply felt that answering an ancient call was fundamentally, deeply right in a way that defied logical explanation. On the 23rd day of travel, something unexpected happened. 3 alien vessels appeared on the edge of sensor range, matching the human fleet trajectory. Captain, we have company, Lieutenant Chen reported. 1 Kryn science vessel, 1 Valoran medical ship, and a Threen automated probe. Elena raised an eyebrow. Are they hostile? No, ma'am. They're requesting permission to join the expedition. The Kryn vessel commander appeared on the view screen. Ambassador Thex's crystalline form refracted the light in familiar patterns. Captain Vasquez, I am here against the explicit recommendations of my government. They sent me to document human irrationality for scientific study. I told them I would do so. Pause. I did not tell them that I was curious to see if perhaps we have forgotten something important. The Valoran medical ship's representative, Dr. Zapira, pulsed with gentle colors. My people wish to understand human psychology, how a species can feel grief for those they never knew. We find it medically fascinating. The 3 probe simply transmitted recording for historical archives. Proceeding. Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest. Welcome to the expedition. All vessels maintain formation. We jump. Together the journey continued. Days became weeks. The crews trained together, ate together, and slowly began to understand one another. The Kryn scientist who had come to study human foolishness found herself sharing memories of her own ancestor, Explore, who had died alone on a distant world. Her distress call never answered because no one thought to look. The Valoran doctor conducted interviews trying to quantify human compassion and found her own species' emotional range expanding through exposure. On day 79, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of The outer veil, what they found made. Every crew member fall silent, the star. System was dead, not old dead. Planets, that should have been intact were reduced to asteroid fields, moons hung. In incorrect orbits, their surfaces, scarred by weapons that no longer existed, and at the center at the exact coordinates specified in the signal, floated a structure so massive it dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. It's a generation arc, Marcus breathed, his hands frozen over his console. Colony ship designed for multi-000 year journeys, Captain, that thing is it must be 200 km long. The arc drifted in the void like a tombstone, its hull pitted and scarred by 80,000 years of micrometeorite impacts. It was dark, cold, dead, but it was magnificent. Even in death, it spoke of a civilization that had reached for the stars with desperate hope. Life signs, Elena asked quietly. Negative thermal signature consistent with ambient background temperature. It's been cold for a very, very long time. The fleet moved closer. As they approached, something unexpected happened. Lights flickered along the arc's exterior, faint, weak, but present. Ancient systems triggered by proximity sensors sparked to life. One final time, a holographic projection burst into existence before the fleet, massive enough that every ship could see it clearly. The image was alien, a being that stood on two legs but possessed a serpentine grace with scales that seemed to shimmer in colors human eyes could barely process. Its face was elongated, its eyes large and dark, and when it spoke, the translation matrix struggled to render the ancient language into something comprehensible. If you are receiving this, then time has been kinder to you than it was to us. The being said, its voice carried exhaustion, grief, and a desperate hope that cut across 80 millennia. We are the Valen. We were people. We built cities that touched the sky. We wrote poetry we loved. We sang songs to the stars. The hologram flickered and the scene changed. Beautiful cities, elegant architecture, millions of beings living in harmony. Then fire, weapons tearing through the sky, planets burning. War came. The Valen continued. We fought ourselves as species do. By the time we realized our mistake, it was too late. Our worlds were dying. Our children were dying. We built 20 arc ships hoping that some would survive to carry our story forward. This is Arc 7. The hologram showed thousands of Valen boarding the massive vessel, carrying children, carrying precious items, carrying hope. The Ark launched and space swallowed it. We have been calling for 80,000 cycles of our home world. If it still exists, we call to anyone who might hear. We do not ask for rescue anymore. We know we are dying. The systems fail. The cold creeps in. We ask only this. Remember that we existed. Remember that we tried. Remember that we reached out, hoping someone would care. The hologram focused on the speakers. Vase. Tears universal across species ran down. Scaled cheeks. Please, we do not want to disappear. We do not want our story to end in silence and darkness. If you hear this, please remember us. The projection died. The lights on the Ark flickered once more and went dark. In the fleet, on 12 human ships and 3 alien vessels, there was absolute silence. Dr. Amara Akinquo wept openly. Marcus Chen's hands gripped his console until his knuckles turned white. Ambassador Thex's crystalline form seemed to dim, her light refracting differently. Elena Vasquez stood on her bridge, staring at the ark floating in the darkness, and felt the weight of 80,000 years pressed down on her shoulders. "We heard you," she whispered. "We came and we will." Remember, the boarding parties assembled in the shuttle bay of the Persistence. 12 humans, 3 CR scientists, 2 Valoran medical specialists, and a small 3 recording drone. They wore environment suits designed for extreme conditions, carrying lights powerful enough to pierce 80,000 years of darkness. "Remember," Elena addressed them over the comm channel, "this is a tomb. We treat it with respect. We document everything, and we find out what happened." The first shuttle docked with the ark's external airlock. Marcus Chen worked for 20 minutes to manually override the ancient mechanisms, his tools looking impossibly crude against technology that predated human civilization. When the door finally groaned open, a gust of stale air burst out, air that had been sealed for longer than human history. The interior corridor stretched before them, vast and silent. Their lights revealed walls covered in script they couldn't read, images they couldn't fully comprehend. But some things were universal. They saw pictures of families. They saw what appeared to be children's drawings. They saw hope preserved in metal and composite materials. "My God," whispered Dr. Okonkwo, her scientific training momentarily overcome by raw emotion. "They lived here. This wasn't just a ship, it was a home." They moved deeper. The ark was massive beyond comprehension, its interior a city designed for millions. They passed through residential sections where belongings still sat on shelves, items whose purpose they could only guess. They found what might have been schools, hospitals, gardens long dead. Every section told the same story. Life interrupted. "Captain, you need to see this," Marcus called from ahead. The team gathered in what appeared to be a central chamber. The walls were lined with thousands of cylindrical pods, each roughly 2 m long, cryogenic suspension units. Humanity had similar technology, though far less sophisticated. "How many?" Elena asked quietly. "Scanning shows approximately 4 million pods throughout the ship," Ambassador Thex reported, her instruments scanning methodically. "All inactive, all showing critical failure signatures dating back approximately 79,000 years. 4 million Valen had climbed into these pods, closed their eyes, and expected to wake in a new world. Instead, they had died in their sleep, all of them. Entire population of Arc 7, frozen in their final moments. The team worked in silence, documenting, scanning, trying to understand what had caused such catastrophic system failure. Dr. Okonkwo took samples, her hands steady despite the tears running down her face. Behind her faceplate, "Found something," Lieutenant Sarah Chen called out. She stood before a terminal that still showed faint power readings, some kind of log, last entry dated. She paused, cross-referencing with their translation matrix. Approximately 79,200 years ago, the holographic display flickered to life, showing the same Valen from the distress message, but older now, frailer, tired beyond measure. "Day 8, 42 since system failure began," the recording stated. "We've lost 98% of the cryogenic systems. The cascade failure was caused by micrometeorite impact that damaged the primary reactor shielding. We couldn't repair it in time. They're dying, all of them, my mate, my children, everyone." The Valen-scaled hands trembled as they entered commands. I've rerouted all remaining power to the distress beacon and the 12 pods in Section 7. It's all I can do. If anyone ever finds us, maybe someone will survive. Maybe our story won't end here. The recording ended. The terminal went dark. Section 7, Alina said immediately. Where is Section 7? They ran through corridors that hadn't known footsteps for longer than human language had existed, through chambers that had once echoed with life and conversation. They ran until Marcus' scanner indicated they had reached the right location. Section 7 was different, smaller, more isolated. At its center, surrounded by heavy reactor shielding that must have protected them from the initial catastrophe, stood 12 cryogenic pods, and their displays impossibly, incredibly, showed active status. No, Ambassador. Thex breathed. That's not possible. Nothing survives that long. The probability is scan them, Alina ordered. Now the Valoran medical team moved forward with their instruments, their bioluminescent forms pulsing with intense concentration. Dr. Zapira's voice came through the comm, trembling with disbelief. Life signs detected. 12 individuals, vital signs weak but stable. Captain, they're alive. Against every law of probability, against every statistical model, they're alive. The team stood frozen, staring at the pods. Inside each one, dimly visible through the frosted viewing ports, lay a veil. In sleeping, waiting, alive. Ambassador Thex's crystalline form seemed to crack slightly, an expression of deep distress in our species. Captain Vasquez, we must consider carefully. These beings are from a civilization that fell when your species still hunted with stone tools. Everything they knew is gone. Their language is dead. Their culture is extinct. Their very planet may no longer exist. Waking them would be an act of profound cruelty. We would give them life only to suffer the knowledge that everything they loved has turned to dust. We can't just leave them, Marcus protested. Can't we? The countered they. Sleep peacefully now. We could let them continue to sleep, never knowing their entire civilization died. Sometimes engineer mercy means letting go. Alina stood before the pods, her reflection ghostly in the frosted surface. She thought about all the arguments, weighed all the ethical considerations. Then she thought about that Valen in the recording, using their last moments to give these 12 a chance. They called for help, Alina said. Quietly, someone answered. That someone is us. We didn't come this far to decide their fate for them. We wake them, we tell them the truth, and we let them choose whether they want to continue or to rest. The decision is theirs, not ours. Captain, I must protest, Thex began. Protest noted. Alina cut her off gently. But we're doing this, Dr. Zapira. Dr. Okonkwo, can you coordinate the revival process? The two doctors looked at each other across the vast gulf of their different biologies, then nodded. Together, Dr. Okonkwo said, we'll need Kryn expertise too. This technology is far beyond any of us individually. We're going to need several days to prepare. Dr. Zapira pulsed. Process must be gradual, careful. One wrong step and we lose them, Ambassador. Thex was silent for a long moment. Finally, her form brightened slightly. If we are doing this madness, we do it correctly. I will assist, but I want it recorded that I believe this is a mistake. Recorded, Alina confirmed. For the next 6 days, the mixed species team worked around the clock. Human, medical knowledge combined with Valoran, biological expertise, and Kryn technical precision. They studied the ancient cryogenic technology, reverse engineered the revival protocols, prepared medical facilities. The entire fleet held its breath. On the 7th day they began the first revival. The pod systems hummed to life, ancient mechanisms responding to careful modern commands. Inside, the Valen began to stir. Color returned to scaled skin. Breathing resumed after 80,000 years of Valen. Opened their eyes. Panic, confusion. The being thrashed, and the medical teams rushed forward. Dr. Okonkwo spoke softly, her translator working overtime, offering soothing nonsense syllables while sedatives took effect. The Valen calmed, looked around at the strain beings surrounding them, and consciousness faded back into controlled sleep while their body finished the revival process. One by one, over the next week, all 12 were revived, and finally, when the eldest among them, a female named Silas, was fully conscious and stable, Elena stood before her with a translator device and the weight of 80 millennia on her shoulders. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said gently. "You've been asleep for a very long time. I'm so sorry, but I have to tell you what happened." Silas listened as the truth unfolded. Her civilization extinct, her world possibly gone, her people dead for longer than most species in the current galaxy had existed. She listened, and as the words piled up like stones, something broke inside her. The sound that emerged was beyond translation. Grief too deep for words, loss too vast for comprehension. The other Valen hearing joined in a chorus of mourning that echoed through the Ark's ancient corridors. When the cries finally subsided, Silas looked at Elena with eyes that had seen too much. "Why," she whispered, "why did you wake us? Why did you answer a call that was ancient before you even existed?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "Because you asked for help, because no one should die alone in the dark. Forgot, because we would want someone to answer if it were us." Silas was silent, then slowly she reached out a scaled hand. Elena took it, carefully feeling the texture of skin that belonged to a species older than human history. "Thank you," Silas whispered, and clear liquid ran from her large, dark eyes. "Thank you for remembering us." The news spread through the concordant like fire. Through dry grass, 12 Valen alive, 80,000 years after their civilization fell. Humanity had done the impossible. They had answered a call from the dead, and the dead had answered back. In the Great Council chamber, ambassadors from 47 species gathered in emergency session. The holographic display showed the Valen survivors, their images broadcast from the persistence. They were thin, fragile, overwhelmed by a universe they no longer recognized. But they were alive. "This changes everything," declared Elder Cormath of the THR, his massive stone-like body radiating contemplation. "For 300 years, we have operated under the assumption that time creates natural boundaries of obligation, that the dead are beyond our concern. Humanity has proven this assumption false." Concordant dissolved into debate. Philosophers argued about the nature of time and compassion. Scientists presented papers on the psychology of transtemporal empathy. Religious leaders from a dozen species grappled with what this meant for their understanding of Existence and Duty. The Valoran medical team published their findings in the journal Galactic Xenopsychology. The paper was titled Transtemporal Empathy, Humanity's Unique Expression of Extended Compassion. Within a week, it had been downloaded 4 billion times, making it the most read scientific publication in galactic history. Humans, the paper concluded, possess the remarkable ability to extend compassion across temporal distances that would cause most species to experience categorical boundary failure. They grieve for individuals who died before their ancestors existed. They feel obligation to voices silenced before their civilization began. This is not a weakness as previously theorized, but a profound evolutionary advantage we do not yet fully understand. Back aboard the Persistence, the 12 Valens struggled with their new reality. Sela spent hours staring out viewports at a galaxy that looked nothing like the one she remembered. Stars had been born and died. Civilizations had risen and fallen, and through it all her people slept, dreaming of a tomorrow that never came. How do you bear it? She asked Alina one evening as they sat together in the observation lounge. The knowledge that everything ends, that time devours all things. Alina was quiet for a moment. We bear it by remembering, by telling stories, by refusing to let the darkness have the final word. She gestured to the stars beyond the viewport. Every human who has ever lived is dead, except for those alive right now, but we carry their stories, their dreams, their hopes. They live on in us. Sela's scaled hand traced patterns on the viewport surface. We had a saying in my time: to be forgotten is to die twice. I thought we had died that second death. But you remembered us. Strangers remembered us. Over the following weeks, the Valen began to share their knowledge, their language slowly decoded. With the help of the ship's archives, their history preserved in crystalline data storage that had survived when biological bodies could not. Their science, their art, their philosophy, all thought lost forever, now flowing back into the living galaxy. Dr. O. Conquo worked with Sela's to document everything the Valen had possessed. Technology far beyond current galactic standards, their understanding of quantum mechanics, their mastery of energy generation, their medical knowledge. They had solved problems that modern science still struggled with. Your people were brilliant, Amara said during one of their sessions reviewing data on Valen medical technology. Were Sela's repeated softly, past tense. We are ghosts, Dr. Okonkwo, echoes of something that no longer exists. No. Amara said firmly, you are teachers now. Bridges between the past and present. Your civilization ended, but Nala doesn't die unless we let it. The revelation transformed the galactic community's understanding of humanity. Species that had viewed humans as emotionally unstable, as too sentimental for serious interstellar politics, began to reassess. The Kryn, known for their cold logic, quietly began searching their own archives for ancient distress calls they had dismissed as irrelevant. The Thrane, whose species memory stretched back 200,000 years, discovered references to 17 ancient civilizations that had sent out desperate signals. All had been noted and then forgotten, deemed unworthy of investigation. We have failed, Elder Cormath announced before the Concorded Council, his voice carrying the weight of profound shame. We possess the Knowledge of these cries for help and did nothing. We let them die twice, once in body and again in memory. Ambassador Thek stood before her people's assembly, her crystalline form broadcasting to every Kryn world. I traveled with humans to answer a call 80,000 years old. I thought them foolish. I was wrong. They taught me that time does not diminish worth, that compassion is not bound by logic or probability, that sometimes the most irrational act is the most profoundly right. Within months the Concordant established a new doctrine. All ancient distress calls, regardless of age, would be investigated when possible. A joint task force was created, the Temporal Rescue Initiative, led by humans but composed of volunteers from 23 species, dozens of ships, hundreds of crew members, all dedicated to answering calls from the past. The first new mission launched 4 months after the Valen rescue, a signal detected from 62,000 years ago. The fleet included human vessels, Kryn, science ships, Valoran medical craft, and 3 historical archives. They jumped into hyperspace together, united by a principle humanity had taught them. No voice goes unanswered. They found another ark, another tomb, but inside, impossibly, 3 survivors from a species called the Catherine. Insectoid beings with compound eyes that wept with gratitude when they learned someone had heard them, someone had come. A year after the first rescue, the Concorded Council reconvened. Sela stood before them, the first Valen to address the galactic community. In 80,000 years, she had learned the common tongue adapted to the modern universe, but her words carried the weight of ages. For 80,000 years, we called into the void, she began, her voice steady. Despite the enormity of the chamber, we died believing we were forgotten, that our story had ended in silence and darkness, that we had reached out and found only emptiness. She paused, her large dark eyes sweeping across the assembled species. We were wrong. Someone heard, someone cared, someone came. The humans taught this galaxy something we had forgotten. That time does not diminish the value of a life. That distance does not reduce obligation. That compassion is not bound by the limits we place upon it. Silas's scaled hands gestured to the humans in their delegation. They traveled for months to answer a call from before their civilization existed. They risked their lives for people who were already dead. And in doing so, they reminded the galaxy of something essential. We are not alone. We were never alone. As long as someone remembers, as long as someone cares enough to answer, the darkness does not win. The chamber fell silent. Then slowly, delegates from 47 species began to signal their approval. Some with vocalization, some with gestures, some with bioluminescent displays, a standing ovation that crossed the boundaries of species and culture. The Concorded Council passed Resolution 847. Unanimously, never again would a distress call go unanswered due to age. Never again would the past be considered beyond obligation. The living would remember the dead, and the dead would live on through that remembrance. 3 weeks later, the Persistence departed. On another mission, they had detected a signal even older than the Valen, 120,000 years from the galaxy's edge. Alina stood on her bridge, watching the stars streak past as they jumped to hyperspace. Think we'll find anyone? Marcus asked. Beside her, Alina smiled. Maybe, maybe. Not, but someone called for help in. We're going to answer. That's what we do. Now that's what the galaxy does, below. Dex, Silas worked with Dr. Okonkwo, documenting Valen history for the archives. The other 11, Vielen had chosen different paths, some working with the Temporal Rescue Initiative, others settling into the modern galaxy, finding new purposes for lives that had been given back to them. The galaxy had changed, humanity had changed it, not through military might or technological superiority, but through something simpler and more powerful, the stubborn refusal to let anyone die forgotten in the dark. And across the stars on 1,000 worlds, other species began to listen more carefully to the void, began to search for voices they had previously dismissed, began to understand that time was not a wall but a bridge, and compassion could cross any distance if you were brave enough to try. 5 years had passed since humanity answered an impossible call. 5 years since 12, Valen opened their eyes to a universe that had forgotten them. The galaxy was not the same place it had been. Admiral Alina Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Persistence, her uniform now bearing the insignia of the Temporal Rescue Initiative. Around her, 60 ships from 23 different species maintained formation, a fleet dedicated to answering voices from the past. Crew was mixed now, humans working alongside Kryn, Valoran, Threen, and species that 5 years ago wouldn't have understood why anyone would waste resources on the dead. Status report, Alina requested, though she already knew the answer. After 5 years, the routine was comfortable, familiar. 17 ancient signals investigated, replied Lieutenant Chen, who had been promoted to navigation commander. 3 successful rescues, 42 survivors. Total from 3 different species, 14. Memorial sites established for those we couldn't save, 0 missions abandoned. Alina nodded. Not every ancient distress call led to survivors, most led to tombs, to civilization that had truly passed beyond recovery, but they investigated anyway, documented everything, and ensured that those voices were heard and remembered. The dead deserved that much. Chief Engineer Marcus Chen had become something of a legend, the galaxy's foremost expert on archaeological engineering. He could coax life from systems that had been dead for 100,000 years, interface with technologies that predated modern civilization. Universities offered him positions. He turned them all down. I'm needed here, he always said. Dr. Amara Okonkwo worked with all the survivors they'd found, helping them adapt to a galaxy that had moved on without them. She'd published 4 books on transtemporal cultural integration, but more importantly, she'd become a friend to beings who had lost everything and needed someone to understand their grief. The Valen had thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Silas had become an ambassador, a philosopher, and a voice for the forgotten. The 12 survivors had grown to a small community of 43 as they accepted survivors from other rescued species into their family. They lived on a human colony world called Haven, where temporal refugees could rebuild their lives among people who understood loss. Incoming transmission from the Concorded Council announced the communications officer. Silas's image appeared on the main screen. She looked healthier now, more vibrant, though her eyes still carried the weight of ages. Behind her, the council chamber bustled with activity. Admiral Vasquez Silas greeted formally, then smiled. Elena, the council has completed its analysis of the pattern data you sent. Elena leaned forward. For the past year, they'd been investigating something troubling the ancient civilizations. They discovered Vale and Catherine, and others all showed signs of having fallen during similar time frames. Not exactly synchronized, but close enough to suggest a pattern. What did you find? Elena asked. Silas's expression grew grave. Every 100,000 years, approximately, something catastrophic sweeps through this region of the galaxy. Not a war, not a natural disaster, something else. The Valen archives mention it, so do the Catherine records, a cycle of collapse that nearly wipes out spacefaring civilizations. The bridge fell silent. Marcus moved closer to the screen, his mind already racing through the implications. The last cycle was 80,000 years ago. Silas continued, which means the next one is due in 20,000 years. Elena finished, give or take. The council is convening an emergency session. Silas said, your rescues have inadvertently created a library of survivors who remember previous cycles, species who possess knowledge that was supposed to be lost. Elena, humanity's stubborn compassion may have just saved the entire galaxy. After the transmission ended, Elena stood alone on the bridge, staring at the stars. They'd gone looking for ghosts and found a warning from the past, a gift from the dead to the living. Admiral, Marcus said softly. Approaching, we should tell the crew. In a moment, Elena replied, right now. I need to process that we accidentally prevented an apocalypse by refusing to leave ancient corpses alone. Marcus laughed, a sound of disbelief and wonder. Very human of us. The door to the bridge opened and Ambassador Thex entered. Her crystalline form had become a familiar sight aboard the Persistence. She'd never returned to her home world, choosing instead to stay with the Initiative. Captain Admiral, apologies. I heard the news. Everyone's heard the news, Elena said. By now it's probably spread across the entire Concordat. Not that news, the said. We've detected a new signal, current transmission not ancient. Elena spun to face her. What? The holographic display activated, showing stellar coordinates. A species called the Mirren. They just achieved interstellar communication 3 months ago. They've encountered a crisis, an asteroid on collision course with their home world. They sent out a distress call to anyone who might be listening. Admiral, this is their first message to the stars, and it's a cry for help. Elena felt something settle into place, a rightness that transcended logic. They'd spent 5 years answering the past. Now they could answer the present. How far, she asked. 2 weeks at maximum. Hyperspace. But Admiral, we're not the only ones who heard. I'm detecting 73 ships converging on their location from across the Concordat. Species are responding to their call. Elena smiled. Then we won't be alone. All ships plot a course to the Mayan home world. Maximum speed. We have a rescue to perform. Fleet jumped to hyperspace, but this time they were joined by dozens of other CR engineering vessels, Valoran medical ships, 3 cargo haulers carrying supplies. Species who had learned humanity's lesson. When someone calls for help, you answer. 2 weeks later, the combined fleet arrived at the Myron system. The asteroid was massive. A civilization killer, but working. Together using technology from ancient Valen archives and modern engineering. They diverted it barely, the Mirren. Watch from their home world as the sky. That should have brought death instead. Brought salvation. The Mirren were small, furry beings with large eyes and gentle dispositions. When the rescue ships landed and the crews emerged, the Mirren met them with confusion and gratitude. They had called out to an empty universe, not truly expecting anyone to. Here, Elena stood before the Myrons Planetary Council, surrounded by representatives from 40 species. You called for help, she said simply. We heard. We came. A young Mayan named Ziri, their planetary speaker, looked up at the assembled aliens. But why? We are unknown. We have nothing to offer. Why would so many come? Sela stepped forward, her ancient eyes meeting the young Myron's gaze. Because someone taught us that every voice matters, every call deserves an answer. We came because 5 years ago, humanity answered a call 80,000 old. They showed the galaxy that time. Distance and probability do not limit compassion. They taught us that we are all responsible for each other. Zeri's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, thank you. All. 3 months later, Elena stood in her quarters aboard the Persistence, writing her report. The Mirren had joined the Conquered, bringing fresh perspectives and boundless enthusiasm. The ancient cycle of collapse was now being actively studied, with survivors from multiple previous civilizations working to prevent the next one. She thought about that night 5 years ago when Sarah Chen had called her to the bridge to see an impossible signal. She thought about the Concorded Council telling her it wasn't worth investigating. She thought about all the arguments against going, against caring, against answering. A gentle chime announced a visitor. Come in. Young Kryn officer entered, the grandson of Ambassador Thex, recently assigned to the initiative. Admiral Vasquez, I wanted to ask, why do you continue these missions? We've rescued so few compared to those we've lost. The success rate is minimal. Why keep trying? Elena gestured for him to sit. She'd heard this question before, would hear it again. But it was important that each person understand, because every voice that calls out into the darkness deserves an answer, she said quietly. Because civilizations may rise and fall, but compassion is eternal. Because someone someday might need to remember that we existed, and I want the galaxy to be the kind of place that answers. The young officer nodded slowly, something shifting in his crystalline structure. My grandmother says the same thing now. Before she met you, she believed compassion was weakness. And now, Elena asked, now she says it's the strongest force in the universe. Strong enough to cross 80,000 years. After he left, Elena returned to the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly before her, each one a sun. Each sun potentially hosting worlds where voices might call out for help. The universe was vast and cold and dark, but it was also full of people who answered. Her personal console chimed, a priority signal from long-range sensors. Another ancient distress call detected, this one from 135,000 years ago, older than any they'd investigated. The signal was weak, fragmented, but present. Elena smiled and activated the shipwide communication system. All hands, this is Admiral Vasquez. We've detected another Signal, ancient, distant, probably. Another tomb, but possibly not. We're going to answer it because that's what we do. That's what the galaxy does now. Plot a course, we jump in 6 hours. Throughout the fleet on 60 ships from 23 species, crews prepared for another impossible mission. In medical bays, doctors readied equipment for patients who might have been dead since the last ice age. In engineering sections, technicians studied ancient technologies they might need to revive. In recrec rooms, volunteers from a dozen worlds shared stories of why they joined the initiative. Aboard the Persistence, in a small garden that had been added during the recent refit, Sela's tended to plants from her home world, seeds preserved in the Ark's biological archives, now growing again after 80,000 years. She looked up as Ililina approached. Another mission, Sela's asked. Another voice calling from the past. Ililina confirmed. Sela's scaled hand touched a delicate flower, impossibly alive after being extinct for millennia. Once, I believed my people's final message was an exercise in futility, that we called out knowing no one would. Here I was wrong. You heard, you answered, and you taught the galaxy to do the same. We learned from you, Alina said. Your people never stopped hoping, never stopped calling. That takes courage, and answering takes courage too. Sela's replied. Go, Admiral, answer that ancient voice. Someone is waiting, even if they don't know it yet. The Persistence and its fleet jumped to hyperspace, racing toward a call sent before human civilization existed. They would arrive in 3 weeks. They would investigate. They would search. They might find survivors, or they might find another memorial to add to their growing list. But they would answer. They would always answer, because that's what the galaxy had become, a place where no voice went unheard, where the past and present reached across time to touch each other, where compassion was not bound by logic or probability or the cruel mathematics of entropy. And somewhere in the depth of space, an ancient signal pulsed on, its message unchanged across the millennia. Help us. Remember us, please. The fleet heard. The fleet was coming. The darkness would not have the final word, not anymore.